The miracle of industrialization. Industrialization changed everything. Between 1800 and 1900, GDP per person per day doubled. We're going to talk about this just because, while it's not necessarily financial planning related, the economics area of human beings relative to their own financial lives, I think needs to be addressed time and again, because there's so much to be positive. And again, not trying to be Pollyannish, but just the idea of how good we're living and why we are living this well. It needs to be, just given all the negativity out there and all these calls for nationalization and Green New Deals and stuff, it's scary, man, in that regard, because it is. So anyone should listen to at least the other side, and that's what I'm going to bring to you here today. And thankfully, I follow a lot of the libertarian think tanks. This might bore you. Listen to it on the podcast, because I think it's incredible to know. There's a lady named Rose Wilder Lane. If you remember Laura Ingalls Wilder, is that her name? The lady who wrote The Little House on the Prairie. I think it's her daughter. And I'll never forget reading a book or an essay or treatise by Rose. And she had mentioned that basically, and now this is going to be what this talks about here too, but it's not by Rose. But anyway, she had written that everything was flat until all of a sudden something changed and this hockey stick took off. And everything was flat in terms of our productivity, in terms of our wealth, in terms of our ability to live. Everything was flat worldwide, just flat. Then something happened. And we're going to talk about that here. So this is from the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE. If I can get, let's see. No thanks. I'd like, I don't want your updates. I want old recycled documents. I love that. They make you feel guilty. The guy, Marian Tupy, had written this, and I love this stuff. Let's go into it. But just think about what Hong Kong was, what Singapore was. Think about these places, and think about what they are now. It's amazing. Our species is 300,000 years old. For the first 290,000 years, we were foragers, subsisting in a way that's still observable among the bushmen of someplace in the Andaman Islands. Even after Homo sapiens embraced agriculture, progress was still painfully slow. A person born in Sumer in 4000 BC would find, he says BCE, I still like BC, would find the resources, work, and technology available in England at the time of the Norman conquest, or in the Aztec emperor at the time, or Columbus, quite familiar. So think about that. If you were born in Sumer, wherever the hell that is, you would find the resources, the work, and the technology the same as a Norman conquest, as the Aztec empire, or in Columbus. Can you think? It's true. Then, beginning in the mid-18th century, many people's standard of living skyrocketed. Why? What brought about this dramatic improvement? A rising global income. Our story has to begin with the income, as Oxford economist Paul Collier has noted, economic growth is not a cure-all, but lack of growth is a kill-all. That's a great quote, man. I don't know who Paul Collier is, but that is a great quote. The history of economic growth, as Agnes Madison and his team at the University of Groningen found, resembles a hockey stick. Actually, I attribute that to a Rose Wilder Lane first and foremost. I don't know if she actually called it a hockey stick, because that was before maybe hockey, but she certainly said from BCE 5000 to 1820 there was nothing. Then boom. So all attributes goes to Rose Wilder Lane. For thousands of years, growth was negligible. This period is represented by the shaft of the stick. Towards the end of, in fact, this is the one time the hockey stick actually is applicable. Old Michael Mann's hockey stick, the fraud that it is. Burn that sucker, or break it with a Zdeno Charles slap shot. But this isn't actually a hockey stick that will survive the test of Zdeno's Charles slap shot, or Al Iafredi, if you're an old school hockey, we remember him from the Capitals. He had a huge slap shot, 130 miles an hour. Towards the end of the 18th century, however, economic growth started to accelerate, first in Great Britain and then in the rest of the world. The blade represents the sharp upward turn. As measured in 2011 US dollars, the global income per person per day in the first year of the AD after the minimum, whatever that is, he calls it common area, stood at $2. So we'll go back to the common area. I'm going to say AD. As measured in 2001 dollars, the global income per person per day in the first year of the AD stood at $2. That's also where it stood when William the Conqueror set sail in 1066 to claim the crown of income. $2. The global income per person per day at the beginning of the modern era stood at $2. In William the Conqueror's time, it stood at $2. This income stagnation does not imply that no economic growth occurred over that millennium. Growth did occur, but it was low, localized, and episodic. In the end, the gains always petered out. In 1800, the average income was $2.80. Thus, in the 18th centuries that separated the emperorship of Caesar Augustus and the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, per capita income rose by less than 40% total. Again, there were regional differences, but they were not great. At the start of the 19th century, average American Britons were twice as prosperous as the global average. That's it. Twice as prosperous. Then industrialization changed everything. Between 1800 and 1900, GDP per person per day doubled per day. In other words, income grew over twice as much in one century as it had the previous 18 combined. By 2016, the number had risen to $40. In the U.S., it stood at $145. And in Africa, the world's poorest continent, it was at $13. In other words, global and American standards of living rose 12-fold globally and 24-fold American, respectively, over the last 2 centuries. Whereas before, it had only risen 40% over 18 centuries. The global income per person per day rose at a compounded rate of about 1.8% per year over the last 100 years. It will reach $166 per person per day in the year 2100 if the trend continues. That's a big if. In the United States, it will reach $605 per day. That's freaking... One might object that GDP figures are not the same as take-home pay. Unfortunately, a global hourly wage is tough to calculate. People work different numbers of hours. Economies are composed of different kinds of workers. The proportion of non-wage compensation differs. But do we know how American workers fared over the last 200 years? Well, according to a couple of professors, nominal hourly wages of unskilled U.S. laborers increased 31,000% between 1800 and 2016. 31,000%, actually 32 if we round up, 32,000% nominal hourly wages. That's before inflation's taken place, but inflation did not increase that high. The nominal hourly compensation of production workers rose almost 80% over the same time. Adjusting for inflation, this economist at BYU in Hawaii estimates that production worker compensation rose by a factor of 40 and unskilled labor rose by a factor of 16. What was responsible for these unprecedented improvements? Scholars offer different but related explanations. Douglas North, and I've read him, the Nobel Prize winning economist, I think he's the guy who said get rid of the fiat currency, go back to free banking. Douglas North, read some of his stuff on free banking. It's freaking awesome. It's awesome. For all you Bitcoin guys out there, free banking is fantastic. I wonder what he thinks about Bitcoin. The evolution of institutions, including constitutions, laws, and property rights, was instrumental to economic development. Deidre McCloskey at the University of Illinois Chicago attributes the origins of the Great Enrichment to the changing attitudes about markets and innovation. We all know Harvard psychologist Steve Pinker contends that material and spiritual progress are rooted in the Enlightenment and the concomitant rise of reason, science, and humanism. I want to point out, Deirdre McCloskey used to be a man. It's interesting, actually. This is one of those issues that when it comes like transitioning, all that, I don't know how I feel about that. There's a guy who used to sing, I forgot his name off the top of my head, and his band I loved growing up, A Life of Agony, and he's now named Mina, M-I-N-A. And it's an odd, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about this. I don't like the idea of a guy who's now a woman participating in women's sports. I don't like that. I don't think that's fair. I don't like the idea of giving young children their hormone stuff or their, keeping them from having puberty. I think that's child abuse because they can't make decisions for themselves. You would no more give them a cigarette or a beer as you would, his hormones or puberty restricting things. That's child abuse without question. If they want to make a decision later on, they can. But it's interesting for all those out there who say, the people on our side, the libertarian right, the Christian right, are inherently against this kind of stuff. I think you're making a mistake. And for those on the right who's do say, I think you're making a mistake too. There's more that goes into this than just boilerplate slogans. I don't know how I feel about it. And frankly, it doesn't matter how I feel. Deidre McCloskey is now Deidre McCloskey, whatever her name was. Is there a lot of chaos left behind? Yep, there is, without question. I was reading an article the other day about this guy who transitioned. He and his wife and 3 or 4 kids, and they're like, man, they left us in ruins. And I think some of these guys who do that are the most selfish people ever, without question. But are the most selfish people ever husbands who leave their wives and 4 kids and don't transition? They just cheat? They go, yes. I mean, it's not just we can make a case for marriage being horrible because there's so many men and women who don't follow what they're supposed to do. So you can make the case on anything you want. Anyway, it's just as interesting. I actually emailed Deidre McCloskey. I said, I'd just like to talk to you, interview you for the podcast, and what you went through. What do you think? And just see what. But she never got back to me. I wouldn't expect her to. I'm just some dude, but I'm sure she gets that all the time. But I actually did send her a thing. I'd love to just chat because I'm agnostic on that. I literally, truly, I'm agnostic on that. I feel there's some things that are, in my opinion, you can't abuse children, no matter how you do it. You can't force your beliefs on your kids relative to affecting their growth. That's nuts. You can't have men competing in women's sports just because they say they transition. That's not fair. Another thing to me is that it always seems to be the men transitioning, not that many women transition to men. And I just wonder what that is. I don't know if it's something that society has encouraged men not to. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. But also something like Deirdre McCloskey, who took the arrows, and it's kind of like the gay guys of the early 80s and late 70s. They took the arrows so all these crazy freaking loons can be out here today saying that we're allies and all that when they weren't. They wouldn't have been 20 or 30 years ago. There are real live people out there who took the arrows so you could, show your virtual signaling that you would not have done that because the mass majority was against these people back then. And I guarantee the same people who are freaking beating down the Trump supporters would have been the same people beating down the gay rights supporters, guarantee. And it's just that ticks me off without question. It's easy now, but Deidre McCloskey and those people, they took the arrows for sure. And I always think that it's weird how, the people who took the arrows, it's kind of like the same thing. Charlton Heston, March of Martin Luther King. People hate Charlton Heston because he's an NRA guy, but he did that before it's popular to do that. You see what I'm saying? Without question, he did. And yet now it's easy to say, I would have marched for Martin Luther King. That guy, what's that guy's name? Sean King or whatever, this fool. I would have marched for Martin Luther King. Yeah, it's easy to say that now. You don't know that. All right, back to the story. Whatever its exact causes, the Industrial Revolution, which started in the mid-18th century, brought widespread changes, including new fuels such as coal and petroleum, new motive power such as the steam engine and the ICE, internal combustion engine, new machines such as the spinning jenny and the power loom, and the factory system, which reorganized work and required much greater division of labor and specialization of function. These changes increased the use of natural resources and enabled the mass production of manufactured goods. The Industrial Revolution also led to fundamental non-economic changes, improvements in agricultural productivity allowed a larger population to eat. That, along with new opportunities for factory work, increased urbanization and contributed to the development of political awareness among the lower orders. At the same time, wealth became more widely distributed as landed interest gave way to the interests of the nouveau rich bourgeois. All in all, old patterns of authority were eroded and society became more democratic. Important political developments such as liberalization of trade allowed the benefits of industrialization to spread globally. I could not agree with that more. Trade volumes rose, and through the process of price convergence, costs fell. The gold standard and the invention of the telegraph made capital transfers easier. Attracted by higher profits, investment flowed from more developed to less developed countries. It's just all kinds of stuff. So income growth, it is true, is only one of many indicators of human well-being. After all, Alexander the Great, who was the richest and most powerful man in the world, died at the age of 32 from typhoid fever, a disease that is easily curable today. But a wealthy society can support more sciences, pay for advanced medicine, and build better sanitation infrastructure. Wealth makes almost everything easier. I find that funny. So he gives all this list of other things. In 1820, 90% of humanity lived in extreme poverty. Today, less than 10% does. As of late 1870, life expectancy in Europe, the Americas, and the world was 36, 35, and 30 years respectively. Today it's 81, 79, and 72. In 1800, 88% of the world's population was illiterate. Today, 13% is. In 1800, 43% of children died before their 5th birthday. Today, less than 4% does. In 1816, less than 1% lived in a democracy. In 2015, 56% do. And food supply in 1800 per day in France, which was one of the most advanced countries of the world, was a mere 1846 calories. In 2013, food supply per person per day in Africa, the world's poorest continent, was 24 calories. Slavery, which was rampant in most of the world in 1800, is now illegal in every country. Is it still illegal in Sudan? Anyway, oh man, I don't know how you can't. Here. Today is de rigueur to focus on the negative aspects of industrialization, but contemporary observers understood they were living at a time of unprecedented improvement in the human condition. And here's the Communist Manifesto. The bourgeois, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than all preceding generations together. Subjection of nature's forces to man, machinery, application of chemistry to industry and agriculture, steam navigation, railways, electric telegraphs, clearing of whole continents for the cultivation, canalization of rivers, whole population conjured out of the ground what earlier century had even presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor. So even though Karl Marx and Frederick Engels saw that. If progress is to continue, it is vital that people throughout the world, including socialists in America, better understand the vast extent of improvements in human well-being over the last 2 centuries and the reasons for those improvements. Yeah, that's just awesome. All right, so a little bit of an interesting topic. I love that stuff. I love it. I just find that incredibly fascinating. On top of some contemporary political analysis by your old buddy Josh on the whole transgender thing, and we took a side note there, so don't get caught up in that. I love it. The Miracle of Industrialization from FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. Read it and find comfort. I wonder, do they allow for comments on here? Open comments. I'm not going to open comments, but read it. There's only 2 comments. Okay, I'm not going to. All right, we'll see you next time. Smash. Thanks now.